I want to tell you a story about a man who lived in a flat on his own, and sometimes he felt a little bit lonely, and so one of the things he did to kind of get over his loneliness, he thought he would buy a parrot, and then he could talk to the parrot. So he went along and he bought this parrot. Now, as you know, parrots, if you say something to them enough times, then eventually they kind of pick it up and they start to speak back to you. Well, one of the things that this chap did was when anybody ever visited him and they knocked on the door, before he answered the door, he would always say, "Who is it?" And the person would say, you know, "It's the postman," and so he would let him in. And whoever came and knocked on the door, he always said, "Who is it?" And eventually the parrot kind of picked up on this. So when people knocked on the door, instead of the man saying, "Who is it?" the parrot used to say, "Who is it?" Well, one particular day, he got up one morning and all his carpet was wet because he'd had a burst pipe. And it was a bit of a crisis for the poor chap. So he phoned a plumber up and said, "I've got a burst pipe, I need it repairing." And the plumber said, "Well, I'll get round as soon as I can, be sometime today, but I've no idea what time it will be." So the man waited, and he waited, and he waited, and he waited, and he got to about 4 o'clock, and he had a little bit of shopping to do, and he knew the shops would be shutting, so he thought, well, I'm going to have to go and do my shopping, and hopefully I'll be back before the plumber comes. Well, ironically, when he was out doing his shopping, who should come to the door but the plumber? So the plumber knocked at the door, and the parrot said, "Who is it?" So the plumber said, "It's the plumber, I've come to mend the pipes." And the parrot said, "Who is it?" And he said, "It's the plumber, I've come to mend the pipes." And the parrot said, "Who is it?" And he said, "It's the plumber, I've come to mend the pipes." And the parrot said, "Who is it?" And he says, "It's the plumber, I've come to mend the pipes." And the parrot said, "Who is it?" He said, "It's the plumber, I've come to mend the pipes." And the parrot said, "Who is it?" He said, "It's the plumber, I've come to mend the pipes." And the parrot said, "Who is it?" Went on a long time, did this. To cut a long story short, the poor old plumber eventually got so exhausted that he collapsed on the doorstep with exhaustion. About 2 minutes later, the man came back, saw this guy in a heap on his doorstep, and he said, "Who is it?" And the parrot said, "It's the plumber, I've come to mend the pipes." Now, what I want to suggest to you tonight is that everything that we do in a carol service is answering that question, who is it? Because we know that we've come to celebrate this Christ child that's come into our world. And when we, when we read these wonderful readings and we sing these carols, and we kind of think about all the Christmas stuff about the shepherds and the angels and the wise men and all the prophecies in the Old Testament, they're all pointing to answer this question, who is it? Now, what I want to do tonight in my, I've got a 10-minute epilogue to do, and I don't really do 10-minute epilogues, but it's only 7 o'clock, so I'm feeling quite relaxed. Is I want to take you on a 300-year journey of questions that people have asked about Jesus. So this first question, which they were asking in the first century, is who is it? So what I want is, I need some volunteers to hold the... I was wondering if I was being stoned, but I'm thinking I'm being shooed. It's all right. It's all right. I think I'll stand over here. So I just need some people to hold up this question. So volunteers, wow, that's good. If you can come and stand out here. If you hold that one over there, and then another one, I need about 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I need 8 people altogether. Okay, so you stand next to him. If you just hold it, keep your arms down because I'll be speaking for about an hour. And your arms will ache. So if you kind of push that way as far as you can together, and there's one for you. I need some more volunteers. You don't have to be under 16 to volunteer, by the way. Any age will do, as long as you can stand for an hour. So I need 3 more volunteers. Well done, Janet.
16.
You're doing it. You're doing everything tonight. 2 more volunteers I need. Do you want to kind of just go just up there? If you kind of sneak along there, now Janet's moved, you can go there. That's right. Are you one or two?
One.
One, right. So you've taken your shoes off. That's good. And I just need somebody to hold the question mark. Who will come and hold the question mark?
Oh, here we are.
Catherine's holding it, right. So this is the question, who is it? You see, when we've had some readings from Matthew's Gospel and from Luke's Gospel tonight, and they've told us about angels and about shepherds and all that kind of stuff, because when Matthew and Luke wrote their Gospels, primarily they were writing to Jewish people who had Old Testament scriptures which spoke about the coming of Christ, and they spoke about everything that would be surrounding it. So what they were trying to do, they were trying to answer this question, who is it? Now when particularly John wrote his Gospel, he was writing mainly to the Greeks and to the Romans, and so he doesn't have any kind of mention of all the shepherds and all that kind of stuff. But what he's trying to get across is the wonder that Jesus has come into the world, and he's answering the question, who is it? And if you follow church history, you find that by the time you get to the 3rd century, this person of Jesus, whoever he is, has had such an impact, because there's churches all over three different continents, that people are asking the question, well, who is this Jesus? And by the time you get to the 3rd and the 4th century, the church leaders, the church fathers got together and they actually produced something which we call the Apostles' Creed. Now, does anybody here know the Apostles' Creed by heart, that you could stand up and recite it? Or are you just a bunch of non-conformists? Well, I am. I don't really know it. I believe in God, the Father Almighty, maker of, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son. And so it goes on. And what the Apostles' Creed does really is it answers this question, who is Jesus? Who is it? And the Apostles' Creed was taken mainly from the Gospels and from the Epistles, everything that was written about Jesus, and it was answering the question, who is it? That was what they were trying to get across. Well, the Greeks and the Romans, they believed in gods, but not in the gods of Jehovah, not the Yahweh God. They just believed in a whole pantheon of gods, many, many different gods. So when John wrote his Gospel, he was trying to get across to them who Jesus was, and the main thing he was saying was that Jesus was actually God in human flesh, who came, who lived, who died, who rose again, and eventually kind of started this thing that they knew as the Christian church, the Christian movement. So John was trying to get across this fact of who is it, and for a long, long time, generally speaking, that was something which shaped the world. But I want to take you to the year about somewhere between 1724 and 1804, which is a long, long time ago. And there was a man who lived in those days, and his name was Immanuel Kant. Sounds like a Premiership footballer, doesn't he? But he wasn't. He was actually a philosopher. And Immanuel Kant is known as the father of philosophy. And he said, the thing that he said was that you could only know things by two different ways. One is empiricalism and the one is rationalism. Now, I know you all know what I mean by those big words, so I will explain them to you. Rationalism is the way that we reason things out with our mind. They were just becoming into what we know as the age of reason. And he was saying the only way you can actually discover things is by reasoning it out. And empiricalism is what we learn by experience. So as we reason things out and we experience things, we can increase our knowledge. And what Immanuel Kant said was that you can't reason God out, because God is infinite, and we can't work him out in our minds. And he said because we can't work him out, we can't experience him. So therefore, we don't really know what God is like. So what happened was the question, instead of asking who it is, the question actually became, is it who? So you need to move. So there is, if you can come over here, you three. So we've got I and S. Are you S? Yeah, so if you go into the corner, Janet. So you're I, and then you stand there. That's right. Is it? That's right. Is it who? It was still a question. And what they did, they kind of reduced God to a God among every other God. And they asked this question, well, is it who? Because you can't reason God out and you can't experience God. That's what Immanuel Kant said. So people began to doubt the things that we held fundamental about God. And shortly on the heels of him, there came another guy, maybe one who's a little bit better known, and this guy was known as Charles Darwin. Now, if Immanuel Kant was a philosopher, Charles Darwin was a biologist. And Charles Darwin, if you know the story of Charles Darwin, he kind of went on a ship, I think it was called the Beagle, and he was trying to discover all kinds of things. And one of the things he was trying to discover was the origin of life. And eventually he wrote a book, and the book was called The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. And he came up with what we know as the theory of evolution. And what he kind of said was that he very much doubted that we'd actually been created by God. He very much doubted that there was a beginning to life, that somehow or other we were some kind of chemical reaction that happened billions and billions of years ago, and we just kind of eventually formed our way into being somehow or other. So the question, instead of being, first of all, who is it, or it became, is it who, the question then became, how is it? So we need to move again. So you three, you need to come back here. So the H goes in the corner. And then the H-O-W. And then we've got, that's right. That's what the question became, because people were kind of questioning the very kind of foundations of life itself. How is it, they were saying? It sounds a little bit like a cricket thing, doesn't it? Well, not an English cricket thing, by the way. But that was the question. How is it? And that was what people were asking in those days. But then when we came out of the 1800s into the 1900s, there was a guy by the name of Albert Einstein. Anybody remember Albert Einstein? He lived a long, long time ago, but some of you might be old enough to remember him. Nobody knew him? No? Well, Albert Einstein was a physicist. So we've had a philosopher, we've had a biologist, and now we have a physicist. And in 1916, Albert Einstein wrote his theory of general relativity. And what he did is he kind of worked out how water and air and land and the skies and matter and energy and all these kind of things, he worked out how they all fit together. And what he concluded, Albert Einstein, in his theory of general relativity, is that the universe must have had a beginning. It couldn't just happen by accident. It couldn't just be a chemical reaction. And if it had a beginning, that meant there must be somewhere a beginner. Now, Albert Einstein didn't like that because he couldn't explain it. And then he came up with the first and second laws of thermodynamics, which I'm sure you all know very well as well. But what those kind of laws said was that when you think about cause and effect, some things cause things and other things are the effect of them. He realised that us here in the universe and as human beings on planet Earth within that universe, we are the effect of something and not the cause of something, that we must have been here, something must have begun the beginning. So instead of asking the question, how is it? The question then became again, is it who? Because Einstein was saying, well, what is it? Who is it? So it became, is it who? So we need to move again. It's very exciting, isn't it, being out of the front? And Albert Einstein was followed very quickly on the heels by a man named Edwin Hubble. And Edwin Hubble, we've had a physicist, we've had a biologist, we've had a philosopher. Edwin Hubble was an astronomer, and he had a telescope. He actually invented a telescope, and it's known as the Hubble telescope. He didn't use that initially. He used his one from Argos, but he got fed up of that, so he had to make his own, known as the Hubble telescope. But he examined the universe, all the stars and the galaxies and everything that was out there. And what he realised was, Edwin Hubble, was that the universe is expanding and decelerating. Now, those sound like big words, but you know, we all know what that's like, don't we? Because as we get older, we expand and we decelerate. Don't we, Philip? Some more than others. But you see, what Edwin Hubble concluded, looking out in all those galaxies and everywhere else, was that you know, energy is slowly running out. And if that's true, then it meant that if you roll it back, that somewhere along the line there was a beginning. And so this question, people were not questioning so much that there wasn't a beginning like they were in Darwin's time, but they were saying, what was that beginning? Is it who? Who was it? And it's fascinating, isn't it, these things, really? And I've been doing a little bit of research about more recent things. And apparently there's something called the radiation echo. I want to say at this point that I'm not a scientist, I'm just a farmer, and I've been on Google, so don't ask me too many questions about these kind of things. But in 1965, the Bell Labs scientists discovered something known as the radiation echo. And the radiation echo is the heat afterglow after something like creation. And at that time, people were saying that the universe was in a steady state. They were doubting Edwin Hubble's theory of it being an expanding and decelerating universe. But when they found this radiation echo, they said that was proof that there had been a beginning. And then in 1989, the galaxy seeds, they talked about galaxy seeds, and scientists believed that if first there was nothing and then something came into being, then temperature ripples should exist in space, and it will be these ripples that enable matter to collect into galaxies. And to discover whether these ripples exist, the Cosmic Background Explorer, known as COBE or COBE, was launched in 1989. That's a satellite to find them. And the findings were released in 1992. And what COBE found was that perfect, precise ripples that sure enough enable galaxies to form. So critical and spectacular was this finding that the NASA lead for COBE said, if you're religious, it's like looking at God. Now, I don't really understand the terminology because I can lift heavy things, but I can't really get my head around these things. But I find it incredible that, you know, with modern science, they look out there at everything there is, and they conclude that somewhere there had been a beginning. Now, I've read a few quotes in my time, which I'm always really, really impressed with, by a guy called Robert Jastrow. Has anybody heard of Robert Jastrow? Well, Robert Jastrow is an astronomer, and I'll just find my quotes from him. And he was from Columbia University. He was the chief of theoretical division of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. He was the founder director of NASA Goddard Institute and professor of geophysics at Columbia University, professor of space studies, earth sciences at Dartmouth. Impressed, aren't you? I can tell. And I've read quite a few quotes from this guy in the last few months, and he's an agnostic. He doesn't claim to be a Christian in any way, but he looks at things and he tries to understand things, and he writes about it. And he's written a book. He's actually dead now, died quite recently, but he's written a book called God and the Astronomers. And I've asked Santa this year for that book, so hopefully he will bring me it. But he says some really, really interesting things, and I've got one of them here somewhere. He says about the beginning of the world, he says, the shock that instant must have destroyed every particle of evidence that could have yielded a clue to the cause of the beginning of the universe. An entire world rich in structure and history may have existed before our universe appeared, but if it did, science cannot tell what kind of world it was. A sound explanation may exist for the explosive birth of our universe, but if it does, he says science cannot find out what that explanation is. The scientist purist of the past ends in the moment of creation. And he says this is an exceedingly strange development, unexpected by everybody but the theologians. That's interesting, isn't it? They have always accepted the word of the Bible. In the beginning God created heaven and earth, to which St. Augustine added, who can understand this mystery or explain it to others? It is unexpected because science has had such extraordinary success in tracing the chain of cause and effect backward in time. We have been able to connect the appearance of man on this planet to the crossing of the threshold of life, the manufacture of chemical ingredients of life within stars that have long since expired, the formation of those stars out of the primal mists, and the expansion and cooling of the parent cloud of gases of the cosmic fireball. Now, we would like to pursue that inquiry farther back in time, but he says this: the barrier to further progress seems insurmountable. It is not a matter of another year, another decade of work, another measurement, or another theory. At this moment, it seems as though science will never be able to raise the curtain on the mystery of creation. For the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He is about to conquer the highest peak, and as he pulls himself over the final rock, he is greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. Those are incredible words, aren't they? And what Robert Jastrow is saying, that the question really is, who is it? Where we started. So if we can kind of move back, and we'll put this question back there. And what I want to do is I want to read you, in the final minute of my 10 minutes, I want to read you some words of one of those theologians that Robert Jastrow was talking about. And his name was John. And he tried to answer this question, who is it? And these are the words that he said. He says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and he was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. There came a man who was sent from God, and his name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all men might believe. He himself was not the light, he came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become the children of God, children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling amongst us, and we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. And I think it's absolutely incredible that the Word of God in the year 2017, with all the advances of science and all the questions that have been asked by philosophers, by biologists, by astronomers and the like, that the Word of God still stands. And the most incredible thing is that the Word became flesh, that Christ came amongst us. And that's what we've been singing about tonight, that's what we've been reading about, and that is what Christmas is all about. We're going to sing about that again now in our last song. Thank you very, very much. You've done a